How could a son feel so confident as he took what was never his to sell? Tomorrow, while he celebrates his wedding and dreams of Bali, he'll discover that the apartment, the car, and even his future are built on a single detail he never understood. I stayed silent, but I knew. One fact would unravel everything before his plane ever left the ground. The moving boxes stacked in my hallway should have been my first warning. I stood in the doorway of my own apartment, keys still in my hand, watching strangers catalog my possessions like they were conducting an estate sale. My 62 years of careful living reduced to inventory sheets and packing tape. Dad, perfect timing. Evan Mercer emerged from my kitchen, clipboard in hand, looking every inch the successful finance professional he'd become. At 32, my son had inherited his mother's sharp features, but none of her warmth. We need to talk about the transition. Transition? I set my keys on the entry table, or tried to. A mover had already wrapped it in brown paper. I'm getting married tomorrow, and in a week we're flying to Bali for our honeymoon, Evan announced, his voice carrying the satisfaction of a man who'd just closed a profitable deal. I sold your apartment and the collector car from your garage. The words hit me like cold water, but I kept my expression neutral. 40 years as a mechanical engineer had taught me the value of staying calm while systems collapsed around you. I see. You should be happy, Dad. Clara Voss appeared beside him, her manicured hand sliding possessively around Evan's arm. At 28, my son's fiancée had perfected the art of looking concerned while delivering calculated strikes. This place is far too big for one person, and that old car just sits there collecting dust. I stayed silent, watching them exchange a glance that spoke volumes about conversations I hadn't been included in. They had no idea why that car sat in my collection, or which single detail would collapse everything before their plane even took off. The buyer's offering cash, Evan continued, consulting his clipboard. Enough to cover the honeymoon and set us up nicely. You'll love the assisted living place we found, much more appropriate for someone your age. Assisted living. I repeated the words without inflection, just until we figure out the long-term plan. Clara's smile was perfectly practiced. You understand how important it is for Evan and me to start fresh. Clean slate, you know? I understood more than they realized. I understood that my late wife Kendall's absence had left a vacuum they'd been eager to fill. I understood that respect, once lost, was nearly impossible to reclaim through words alone. Most importantly, I understood that they had no idea what they'd actually tried to sell. My phone buzzed, a text from Mina Torres, my lawyer and one of Kendall's oldest friends. Let's talk soon. Urgent. We're having dinner at Le Bernardin tonight, Evan said, already turning away. Family celebration. Wear something nice, Dad. Clara's parents will be there. I watched them leave, their voices fading as they discussed seating arrangements and wine pairings. Through my living room window, I could see my garage across the courtyard. The 1967 Mercer Roadster sat inside, its custom engine housing secrets that would have impressed them if they'd bothered to ask. But they never asked. They simply took. That evening at Le Bernardin, I sat at the far end of a table that had once been mine to command. The restaurant's soft lighting and murmur of expensive conversations provided the perfect backdrop for what Evan clearly considered his coronation. To new beginnings, he announced, raising his glass of champagne that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. And to Dad, for finally letting go of the past. The table erupted in polite applause. Clara's parents, the Voss family, beamed as if they were witnessing a particularly satisfying hostile takeover. Extended family members nodded approvingly, their faces reflecting the comfortable assumption that youth knew better than experience. Julian, you must be so proud, Mrs. Voss said, her voice carrying the kind of condescension usually reserved for small children. Evan's shown such maturity in handling the family assets. I took a sip of water and said nothing. Around the table, conversations resumed. Stock portfolios, vacation homes, the rising cost of private schools. I had become background noise in my own family's story. The car went to Victor Lane, Evan told his future father-in-law. Collector up in Westchester, paid asking price without even haggling. Smart move, Mr. Voss replied. Those old cars are just money pits. Better to liquidate while the market's hot. I watched my son bask in the approval, his chest puffing with pride at having made what he considered a shrewd business decision. If only he knew that Victor Lane was about to discover something that would make the asking price seem like pocket change, or turn the entire transaction into a legal nightmare. My phone buzzed again. This time it was Tommy Ellis, my old friend who ran a classic car restoration shop. Heard about the Roadster. Call me. I excused myself quietly and stepped outside. The city hummed around me as I stood on the sidewalk, watching well-dressed people emerge from expensive restaurants to climb into cars that cost more than most houses. None of them knew they were witnessing the calm before a very specific storm. My garage had always been my sanctuary, but now it felt like a crime scene. I stood in the empty space where the Mercer Roadster had lived for 15 years, breathing in the lingering scent of motor oil and metal polish. The car was gone, but the memories remained. And more importantly, so did the documentation. I pulled out my phone and called Mina Torres. Julian, thank God. Her voice was tight with professional concern. I've been reviewing the paperwork Evan filed for the apartment sale. We need to meet immediately. What did you find? Several interesting omissions. Can you be at my office in an hour? Mina's law firm occupied 3 floors of a sleek building in Midtown. I'd known her since she was fresh out of law school, when Kendall had introduced us at a charity fundraiser. Over the years, she'd handled our wills, property transfers, and business contracts with the kind of meticulous attention that had made her one of the city's most respected estate attorneys. Sit down, Julian. She gestured to the chair across from her mahogany desk, then spread out a collection of documents. Your son is either incredibly naive or dangerously overconfident. Explain. The apartment sale. She pointed to a stack of papers. Evan signed as power of attorney, but the documentation he filed is incomplete. He's missing 3 crucial authorizations, and the title transfer was never properly notarized. I leaned forward, studying the papers. Meaning? Meaning the sale isn't legally valid. Yet. Mina's expression was grim. But if you don't act quickly, the buyer's lawyers will find ways to make it stand. What I don't understand is why Evan thought he could pull this off without your direct signature. I thought about the months since Kendall's funeral, how gradually Evan had worked his way into my affairs. Doctor's appointments he'd scheduled without asking, bank statements that began arriving at his address, small intrusions that had seemed like care and concern at the time. He's been preparing for this, I realized, slowly positioning himself as my caretaker. There's more. Mina pulled out another folder. The car sale. Tell me about the Roadster. This was the question I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. I looked out her office window at the city skyline, thinking about Kendall's last letter, the one I'd found tucked in the car's glove compartment after her funeral. It's not just a collector car, I said finally. It houses a prototype engine I developed in 1994. Revolutionary fuel efficiency design, with 3 patents still under my name. The engine was never mass-produced, but the technology was classified for potential military applications. Mina's pen stopped moving. Classified how? Export restrictions. Technology transfer limitations. The car can't be sold to certain buyers, can't leave the country, and any ownership transfer requires federal approval. I met her eyes. Approval that Evan never requested because he doesn't know the engine exists. Jesus, Julian. Mina sat back in her chair. Where's the car now? Victor Lane's showroom in Westchester. He's probably trying to register it as we speak. And when he runs the VIN number, he'll discover that he's purchased a vehicle with restricted technology, sold without proper authorization by someone who didn't have legal authority to make the sale. I allowed myself a small smile. Victor Lane is about to become very unhappy with the Mercer family. That evening, I found myself at Clara's parents' house in the Upper East Side, enduring what they called a casual pre-wedding gathering. The Voss family home was a monument to old money and new pretensions, filled with antiques that had been purchased rather than inherited. "Julian, you're looking well," Mrs. Voss said, though her tone suggested she found this somehow disappointing. "Evan tells us you're transitioning to a more manageable living situation." "Downsizing," Clara added helpfully. "It's so important to right-size your life as you get older." I stood in their living room, holding a glass of wine I didn't want, surrounded by people who spoke about me as if I weren't present. The conversation flowed around topics I was expected to find irrelevant: technology, current events, business trends. I had become the elderly relative to be managed rather than consulted. "Dad's always been resistant to change," Evan told the group, his voice carrying the patient exhaustion of someone dealing with a difficult child. "But once he settles into the new place, he'll see how much easier life can be." "It's wonderful that you're taking charge," Mr. Voss said approvingly. "Too many young people let their parents make poor decisions out of misplaced independence." I watched my son accept praise for his wisdom and maturity, for his decisive action in reorganizing my life. Around the room, heads nodded in agreement. The consensus was clear. Evan was doing the right thing, the responsible thing, the necessary thing. None of them asked what I wanted. None of them considered what I might know that they didn't. I was simply an obstacle that had been efficiently removed. My phone buzzed with a text from Tommy. "Victor Lane called me 3 times today. Says there's something wrong with the Roadster's registration. Wants to know about unusual engine modifications. Should I call him back?" I typed a simple reply: "Not yet." Later that night, alone in my hotel room, because my own apartment was no longer available to me, I opened Kendall's letter. Her handwriting was still crisp and precise, the words she'd written during her final illness carrying the weight of a lifetime's partnership. "My dearest Julian," it began, "if you're reading this, then I'm gone, and you're facing the world without me. I know how Evan can be, impatient, ambitious, sometimes cruel in his certainty that he knows better than everyone else. He gets that from my side of the family, I'm afraid. The Roadster isn't just a car, as you well know. It's the embodiment of your life's work, your greatest achievement, and the foundation of our family's real wealth. Don't let him throw it away because he can't see past the surface. You built something extraordinary, Julian. Protect it. Protect yourself. And if the time comes when respect must be earned rather than given, don't hesitate to teach the lesson that needs teaching. All my love, Kendall." I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in my wallet. Tomorrow was Evan's wedding day. In a week, he expected to be on a plane to Bali, funded by the sale of assets he'd never understood. But first, he would discover that some things couldn't be taken simply because you believed you deserved them. The next morning brought news that confirmed my worst fears and best hopes simultaneously. I was having coffee in the hotel lobby when my phone rang. Victor Lane's number appeared on the screen. "Mr. Mercer, we have a problem." His voice carried the tight control of a man trying not to panic. "I've been trying to register the Roadster, and the DMV is asking questions I can't answer." "What kind of questions?" "About modifications to the engine block, about federal documentation, about export licenses." His voice rose slightly. "Mr. Mercer, what exactly did your son sell me?" I took a careful sip of coffee. "What did he tell you it was?" "A 1967 Mercer Roadster, original condition, fully restored. Clean title, no liens, no complications." Victor's breathing was audible over the phone. "But the VIN number is flagged in some kind of federal database. They're saying I need Department of Defense clearance just to register it. That does sound complicated. Complicated? Victor's composure cracked. Mr. Mercer, I've got 47 years in the classic car business. I've never seen anything like this. What the hell is in that engine? I could have explained. I could have told him about the revolutionary combustion chamber design, the ceramic composite components, the fuel efficiency ratings that had caught the Pentagon's attention in 1994. I could have described the 3 patents that made the engine worth more than most people's houses, or the export restrictions that made unauthorized sale a federal crime. Instead, I said, I suggest you speak with my son. It was his transaction. I've been trying to reach him all morning. His phone goes straight to voicemail. Of course it did. Today was Evan's wedding day, and he had more important things to worry about than the consequences of his actions. By now, he was probably getting dressed in his custom tuxedo, adjusting his cufflinks, preparing to walk down the aisle toward a future built on assets he'd stolen and a foundation he'd never bothered to examine. I finished my coffee and walked to my old engineering firm's building. The lobby cafe was a place where retired employees often gathered to maintain connections and share war stories. I wasn't disappointed. 3 familiar faces looked up as I approached their table. Julian! Pete Kowalski stood to shake my hand. Good to see you. How's retirement treating you? Interesting times, I replied, accepting their invitation to sit. How are things at the firm? Busy as ever. Just landed a huge contract with the Navy for fuel efficiency research. Pete's eyes lit up with professional enthusiasm. Funny thing, they specifically mentioned your 1994 patents as foundational work, said the ceramic composite design was still 20 years ahead of its time. Still classified? Asked Maria Santos, our former head of R&D. More than ever, Pete confirmed. Homeland Security has it on the restricted technology list. Can't be exported, can't be reverse engineered, can't be transferred without federal oversight. He looked at me with respect. You really built something special, Julian. The military's been trying to replicate your work for decades. I nodded, accepting their admiration, while thinking about Victor Lane's growing panic and Evan's blissful ignorance. In a few hours, my son would be standing before 200 wedding guests, celebrating his success in liquidating the old man's outdated possessions. He had no idea that one of those possessions was about to destroy everything he'd built. My phone buzzed with a text from Mina. Emergency meeting. Can you come in now? At Mina's office, I found her pacing behind her desk, phone pressed to her ear. She gestured for me to sit while she finished a tense conversation with someone who was clearly not happy. Yes, I understand the implications, she was saying. No, my client was not aware of the unauthorized sale. We'll resolve this immediately. She hung up and turned to me with an expression I'd never seen before, part admiration, part concern, part awe. Julian, what exactly did you build into that car? You've been talking to federal agents. 3 different agencies, actually. Homeland Security, the Department of Defense, and the FBI's Technology Crimes Unit. Mina sat down heavily. They're very interested in the unauthorized transfer of classified technology. Very interested in the fact that someone tried to sell a restricted prototype without proper clearance. And Evan? Is about to have the worst wedding day in recorded history. Mina pulled out a thick folder. I've prepared everything we discussed, plus some additional documentation that came to light during my conversations with federal investigators. Julian, your son didn't just steal your car, he committed a federal crime. I thought about Kendall's letter, about her warning that respect must sometimes be earned through hard lessons. I thought about the months of condescension, the casual dismissal, the assumption that age meant irrelevance. Most of all, I thought about Evan standing in my kitchen, clipboard in hand, announcing that he'd sold my life's work to fund his honeymoon. What's our timeline? I asked. Victor Lane is meeting with federal agents this afternoon. They'll seize the car within hours and begin investigating the sale. Evan's wedding starts at 6. Mina met my eyes. You have a choice, Julian. We can resolve this quietly. Return the money, void the sale, make it go away, or we let your son discover the consequences of his actions in front of 200 wedding guests, his new wife, and her very image-conscious family. Mina's smile was sharp. I have all the documentation ready either way. I stood and walked to her window, looking out at the city where I'd spent my entire career building things that mattered. Somewhere out there, Evan was preparing for the happiest day of his life, confident in his success, secure in his superiority, certain that he'd outsmarted the old man who'd never understood the modern world. He was about to learn how wrong he could be. Prepare everything, I said. It's time my son understood exactly what he tried to sell. The wedding rehearsal was held at the Grand Metropolitan Hotel in a private pavilion that overlooked Central Park. I arrived to find Evan and Clara directing an elaborate production, photographers positioning lights, florists adjusting arrangements, caterers setting up stations for the next day's reception. Everything was perfect, expensive, and designed to impress. Dad, there you are. Evan barely looked up from his conversation with the wedding planner. Try to stay out of the way during the run-through. We've got everything choreographed. I took a seat in the back row of chairs, watching my son orchestrate his perfect day. He moved through the space with the confidence of a man who had successfully eliminated all obstacles, solved all problems, arranged all details to his satisfaction. Clara stood beside him, radiant in her certainty that she'd chosen the right man, the right family, the right future. During a break in the rehearsal, I overheard Evan talking to his groomsmen about the apartment sale. Closed yesterday, he was saying. Cash deal, no complications. Dad's moving to a nice place in Westchester where he can focus on his hobbies instead of worrying about property maintenance. Smart thinking, one of the groomsmen replied. My dad went through the same thing. They resist at first, but they're always happier once you take charge. The key is being decisive, Evan continued. If you let them control the timeline, they'll drag it out forever. Sometimes you have to make the hard choices for them. I listened to my son dispense wisdom about managing elderly parents, accepting congratulations for his mature handling of a difficult situation. Around him, his friends nodded approvingly. He had become the expert on family management, the voice of reason, the responsible adult who'd stepped up when necessary. None of them knew that the apartment sale was legally void, that the buyer was about to discover he'd purchased nothing, that Evan's decisive action had been built on a foundation of ignorance and arrogance. My phone buzzed with a message from Tommy. Victor Lane just called again. Says federal agents are coming to his showroom tomorrow morning. Wants to know if you have any advice. I typed back, tell him to cooperate fully, and tell him the truth about who authorized the sale. After the rehearsal, I drove to my bank branch in Lower Manhattan. The manager, Patricia Huang, had handled my accounts for 12 years. She greeted me with the kind of professional warmth reserved for customers whose financial portfolios commanded respect. Mr. Mercer, good to see you. How can I help you today? I need to review the recent authorization changes on my accounts, I said. Specifically, the power of attorney documentation my son filed. Patricia's expression grew careful. Of course, let me pull up your file. We spent an hour reviewing the paperwork Evan had submitted over the past 6 months. Each document had been carefully crafted to expand his authority over my financial affairs. Bank statements redirected to his address. Investment decisions requiring his approval. Property management transferred to his oversight. The interesting thing, Patricia said, consulting her computer screen, is that none of these changes actually override your primary account controls. Your son has advisory authority, but all major transactions still require your direct authorization. Including property sales? Especially property sales. The apartment transaction he initiated is currently in escrow pending your signature. Patricia looked puzzled. I assumed you were aware of that. I wasn't surprised. Evan's confidence had always exceeded his attention to detail. He'd been so focused on the big picture, liquidating assets, funding his new life, establishing control, that he'd missed the fine print that would destroy everything. "What about the car sale?" I asked. "That's more complicated. The title transfer was processed, but there's now a federal hold on the transaction. Something about restricted technology." Patricia's voice dropped. "Mr. Mercer, what kind of car did your son sell?" "The kind that requires government approval to change ownership." That evening, I returned to the garage one last time. The space felt hollow without the roadster, but I wasn't there for nostalgia. I opened the metal filing cabinet where I kept all my technical documentation: patent filings, government contracts, classified project summaries, correspondence with federal agencies. Tommy Ellis arrived as I was organizing the papers into chronological order. "Julian, this is getting serious," he said without preamble. "Victor Lane is in full panic mode. Says the feds are treating this like a national security issue." "Because it is." I handed him a folder marked Department of Defense, Project Roadster, Classified. The engine in that car represents 15 years of research into advanced combustion technology. The ceramic components alone are worth millions, and the fuel efficiency ratings are still classified. Tommy whistled low as he flipped through the documents. "And Evans sold this to some collector in Westchester? Without authorization, without disclosure, without understanding what he was doing." I pulled out another folder. "The buyer tried to register it yesterday. By this time tomorrow, federal agents will have seized the car and begun investigating the unauthorized transfer of classified technology." "What happens to Evan?" I thought about my son's wedding, scheduled for 6 o'clock tomorrow evening. 200 guests, including Clara's image-conscious family, Evan's professional colleagues, and extended family members who'd spent months hearing about his mature handling of his father's affairs. He's about to discover that some mistakes can't be fixed with confidence and good intentions. My phone rang. Mina Torres calling with final updates. "Julian, everything's in place," she said. "I've prepared a complete documentation package: apartment sale irregularities, car sale violations, financial authorization discrepancies. The federal investigation is proceeding independently, but I have all the civil documentation ready for tomorrow." Timeline? Victor Lane meets with agents at 10 tomorrow morning. They'll seize the car by noon and begin tracing the sale authorization. I estimate Evan will receive his first federal inquiry around 4 o'clock. Mina paused. "His wedding starts at 6. I looked around the empty garage, thinking about all the hours I'd spent here with Kendall, working on the roadster, perfecting the engine design, dreaming about the future we were building together. She'd understood the importance of the work, the significance of the achievement, the responsibility that came with creating something extraordinary. Evan had seen only an old car collecting dust, an asset to be liquidated, an obstacle to his plans. Tomorrow, he would learn the difference. My hotel suite overlooked the same park where Evan's wedding would take place in 12 hours. I stood at the window with my morning coffee, watching early joggers navigate the pathways below, thinking about the chain of events that would soon unfold with mechanical precision. At 9:47 a.m., my phone rang. Victor Lane, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Mr. Mercer, they're here. Federal agents, 3 cars, official paperwork. They're seizing the roadster." His breathing was audible over the phone. "They want to know who authorized the sale, who signed the transfer documents, who told me the car was legal to purchase." "What did you tell them?" "The truth, that your son Evan handled everything, that he presented himself as your authorized representative, that I have documentation showing him as the seller." Victor's voice cracked. "Mr. Mercer, they're treating this like I tried to buy stolen military equipment." "Because you did." "I didn't know. Your son said it was a restored classic car, nothing unusual, clean title, no complications." Victor was pleading now. "They're talking about federal charges, about unauthorized technology transfer, about national security violations. What the hell did Evan get me into? I could have felt sympathy for Victor Lane. He was an honest businessman who'd been caught in the crossfire of my son's arrogance. But sympathy wouldn't undo the damage Evan had caused, wouldn't restore the respect he'd systematically destroyed, wouldn't repair the trust he'd shattered with his casual theft of my life's work. Mr. Lane, I suggest you cooperate fully with the investigation and direct all questions to the person who actually made the sale. At 11:15 a.m., I met Mina Torres at her office for final preparations. She had assembled a comprehensive file that read like an indictment of everything Evan had done wrong over the past 6 months. The apartment sale, she said, spreading documents across her conference table. Void due to incomplete authorization. The buyer's lawyers are furious, threatening legal action for fraud and misrepresentation. The car sale? Federal crime. Unauthorized transfer of classified technology, violation of export restrictions, illegal sale of government-regulated equipment. Mina's expression was grim. Evan's looking at potential federal charges that could include prison time. And financially? Complete disaster. The apartment sale funds are frozen pending investigation. The car sale funds will be seized as proceeds from illegal activity. Evan's bank accounts are about to be locked down by federal order. Mina looked up from her papers. Julian, your son is about to lose everything. His money, his reputation, his freedom, possibly his marriage. I thought about Kendall's letter, about her warning that respect must sometimes be earned through hard lessons. I thought about the months of condescension, the casual dismissal of my knowledge and experience, the assumption that age meant irrelevance and weakness. He made his choices, I said. At 2:30 p.m., I visited my old engineering firm one last time. Pete Kowalski was waiting in the lobby cafe, along with Maria Santos and 2 other retired colleagues who'd worked on the original Roadster project. Julian, we heard about the federal investigation, Pete said as I joined their table. Word travels fast in our community. Everyone's talking about unauthorized transfer of your classified engine design. How bad is it? Asked Maria. Bad enough that Homeland Security is involved. Bad enough that the Pentagon is reviewing all related technology for potential security breaches. I accepted their expressions of concern and support. The person who authorized the sale had no idea what he was dealing with. Your son? Pete's voice was careful. My son. They exchanged glances that spoke volumes about family dynamics and generational conflicts. These were people who understood the value of technical knowledge, who respected expertise and experience, who knew that some things couldn't be learned from business school textbooks or financial reports. What can we do? Maria asked. Be available if federal investigators want to interview the original development team. Help them understand the significance of what was almost lost. I stood to leave. And remember that some lessons can only be learned the hard way. At 4:15 p.m., I was back in my hotel suite when my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Mr. Mercer, this is Agent Rory Ardelin, FBI Technology Crimes Unit. We need to speak with you immediately regarding unauthorized sale of classified technology. Please call. I didn't call. Instead, I sent a text to Evan. Federal agents will be contacting you shortly about the car sale. You might want to postpone your honeymoon. His reply came back immediately. What are you talking about? Everything's fine. Stop trying to ruin my wedding day. At 5:30 p.m., I put on my best suit and drove to the Grand Metropolitan Hotel. The wedding venue had been transformed into something from a luxury magazine. Flowers, lights, elegant table settings, a small orchestra tuning their instruments. Guests were arriving in expensive cars, dressed in designer clothes, ready to celebrate Evan and Clara's perfect day. I found my assigned seat in the 3rd row, behind Clara's extended family and Evan's professional colleagues. Around me, conversations buzzed with excitement about the ceremony, the reception, the honeymoon in Bali that would cap off this fairy tale beginning. Julian! Mrs. Voss approached with her characteristic blend of warmth and condescension. "You must be so proud. Evans handled everything so beautifully. The apartment situation, the asset management, all those complicated details. Such a capable young man." "He certainly is," I agreed. "And now he and Clara can start fresh, without all those burdensome responsibilities weighing them down." She patted my arm sympathetically. "It must be such a relief for you to have someone else handling the important decisions." I nodded politely while checking my watch. In the distance, I could see Evan greeting guests, accepting congratulations, basking in the admiration of family and friends who saw him as the successful young executive who'd taken charge of his elderly father's affairs with wisdom and maturity. My phone buzzed with a text from Mina. "Federal agents just left Evan's apartment. He wasn't there, but they left documentation requiring his immediate contact. This is happening now." The officiant called for everyone's attention. The ceremony was about to begin. I watched Evan take his position at the altar, confident and radiant, surrounded by the trappings of success and the promise of a perfect future. He had no idea that his phone was buzzing with calls from federal agents, that his financial accounts were being frozen, that his honeymoon was about to be canceled by forces he'd never considered. The music began. Clara appeared at the back of the aisle, beautiful and glowing, ready to marry the man who'd proven himself capable of handling life's complexities with decisive action. I reached into my jacket pocket and pulled out the folder Mina had prepared. Everything was documented, organized, ready for presentation. The evidence of Evan's ignorance, the proof of his overreach, the consequences of his arrogance, all contained in a neat package that would destroy his perfect day and reshape his understanding of power, respect, and family dynamics. The officiant gestured for me to approach the microphone for the traditional father's blessing. I stood up, folder in hand, and walked toward the altar where my son waited with complete confidence in his control over our family's future. It was time for him to learn how wrong he could be. The microphone felt familiar in my hands. 40 years of engineering presentations had taught me how to command a room's attention. 200 faces looked up at me expectantly, ready for the traditional father's blessing that would sanctify this perfect union and celebrate Evan's successful transition into family leadership. Instead, I opened Mina's folder. "Thank you all for being here today," I began, my voice carrying clearly through the sound system. "Evan asked me to say a few words about new beginnings and fresh starts, about leaving the past behind and embracing the future." Evan smiled confidently from the altar, Clara radiant beside him, both glowing with the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. In the front row, the Voss family beamed with approval. Around the room, guests settled in for the expected celebration of young wisdom triumphing over old stubbornness. My son has spent considerable effort over the past few months managing what he saw as my outdated attachment to certain assets, I continued. He sold my apartment to fund this wedding. He sold my collector car to pay for the honeymoon. He did this, he told me, because I was too old and set in my ways to understand modern realities. A few chuckles rippled through the audience. This was the story they'd all heard. The responsible son taking charge of his elderly father's affairs, making the hard decisions that needed making. "What Evan didn't know," I said, consulting the first document from my folder, "is that the apartment sale he executed is legally void. The paperwork he filed was incomplete, lacking 3 essential authorizations. The buyer's lawyers are currently preparing fraud charges." The chuckling stopped. Evan's smile faltered slightly, but he maintained his composure. "A minor technical issue," his expression suggested. "Nothing that couldn't be resolved." "More interesting is the car sale," I continued, pulling out a second document. "The 1967 Mercer Roadster that my son sold to Victor Lane for honeymoon money. Evan saw an old car collecting dust. What he actually sold was a prototype vehicle housing classified technology developed under Department of Defense contract." Now I had their complete attention. Conversations stopped mid-sentence. Phones that had been discreetly recording the ceremony were now focused intently on my words. The engine in that car contains revolutionary combustion technology protected by 3 patents under my name. The ceramic composite components are classified as restricted technology under federal export regulations. The fuel efficiency design is considered a national security asset. Evan's face had gone pale. Clara was staring at me with growing horror, beginning to understand that this wasn't a touching father's speech gone slightly off track. Victor Lane attempted to register the car yesterday, I continued, consulting another document. The VIN number triggered immediate federal investigation. This morning, agents from the FBI, Homeland Security, and the Department of Defense seized the vehicle as illegally transferred classified technology. A murmur ran through the crowd. In the front row, Mr. Voss was frantically checking his phone, probably trying to verify what he was hearing. Mrs. Voss looked like she was witnessing a car accident in slow motion. The unauthorized sale of classified government technology is a federal crime, I explained, my voice maintaining the same calm tone I'd used for engineering presentations. The penalties include substantial fines, asset forfeiture, and up to 20 years in federal prison. Evan found his voice. Dad, what are you doing? This is my wedding day. This is your education day, I replied. For months, you've treated me like an irrelevant old man whose opinions didn't matter, whose knowledge was outdated, whose assets were yours to manage as you saw fit. You never asked what I might know that you didn't. You simply took what you wanted and assumed I was too weak or too stupid to stop you. Clara grabbed Evan's arm, her perfectly composed facade cracking. Make him stop, she hissed. Make him stop talking. But there was no stopping now. The room was completely silent except for my voice and the sound of phones buzzing with incoming calls. Probably federal agents trying to reach Evan, lawyers trying to reach the Voss family, vendors trying to understand if the honeymoon bookings were still valid. The financial implications are equally interesting, I continued, pulling out bank documents. All funds from the apartment sale are frozen pending investigation. All proceeds from the car sale will be seized as evidence of criminal activity. Evan's personal accounts are being locked down by federal order as we speak. I looked directly at my son, seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time in years, not as the successful young executive he pretended to be, but as the entitled, arrogant child who'd never learned that respect must be earned rather than demanded. You wanted to start fresh, Evan. Clean slate, as Clara put it. Congratulations. You're about to get exactly that. The room erupted. Guests were talking frantically. Phones were ringing. The Voss family was huddled in urgent consultation. Clara was crying. Not tears of joy, but tears of rage and humiliation as she watched her perfect wedding dissolve into public scandal. Evan stepped away from the altar, his face flushed with anger and embarrassment. You planned this, he accused. You set me up. I documented your choices, I corrected. I preserved evidence of your actions. I protected assets you tried to steal, but I didn't set you up, son. You did that yourself. Victor Lane appeared at the back of the room, escorted by 2 men in dark suits who were clearly federal agents. He looked around the wedding venue with the expression of a man who'd just discovered he'd wandered into a crime scene. Mr. Evan Mercer, one of the agents called out. We need to speak with you immediately regarding unauthorized transfer of classified technology. The remaining pretense of normalcy collapsed completely. Guests were streaming toward the exits. The orchestra had stopped playing. Catering staff stood frozen with champagne glasses that would never be raised in celebration. Clara turned on me with fury that was magnificent in its intensity. You destroyed everything. This was supposed to be the happiest day of our lives. No, I replied calmly. This was supposed to be the day you discovered that actions have consequences, that respect can't be taken, only earned, that some knowledge comes from experience rather than arrogance. I walked over to Evan, who stood paralyzed as federal agents approached. I handed him a single sheet of paper, Kendall's letter, copied and notarized. Read this before you board any plane, I said. Your mother understood what you never did. Family legacy isn't about liquidating assets or managing elderly relatives. It's about understanding what matters, protecting what's valuable, and earning the respect you think you deserve. The agents reached Evan as I turned to leave. Behind me, I could hear Clara demanding answers, the Voss family making frantic phone calls, wedding guests trying to understand what they'd just witnessed. My son's voice followed me as I walked toward the exit. "Dad, wait! We can fix this! We can work something out!" I paused at the door and looked back at the wreckage of his perfect day, the abandoned altar, the scattered guests, the federal agents with their official paperwork, the bride who was discovering that her successful young husband had just become a federal criminal. Some things can't be fixed with confidence and good intentions, I said. Some lessons can only be learned the hard way, and some respect can only be earned through understanding exactly how much you don't know. I walked out of the Grand Metropolitan Hotel and into the evening air, leaving behind the ruins of Evan's arrogance and the beginning of his real education. My phone was already buzzing with calls from Mina, from Tommy, from federal agents who wanted to interview the actual owner of the classified technology. Tomorrow I would begin the process of rebuilding what my son